So having that little bit of background knowledge, going over a few things, we're now ready to jump into some actual specific parts of FL Studio, starting with the channel rack. And to open that up, you can go over here to this button if it's not already open, and you can also press F6 to open and close it. F12 will close everything but the channel rack, and that's what we're going to do to just focus on that here. Now in this particular template that we're working with, we have some sampler channels preloaded into the channel rack. So we have a sampler for a kick, a clap, and holding control. We can also preview these without having to open them up. But just working off of these 4 samplers that we start with to get an idea, each channel has its own settings, which you can open up to the channel settings window here. Right now this is a sampler. It'll show up in this sample settings tab, and there are a number of different editing controls you can deal with, normalizing, reversing polarity, everything like that, working with some different pre-computed effects in this tab. But without getting into too much detail, you can work with your samples here. And then there's also the envelope or instrument settings, where you can deal with envelopes for a variety of different parameters on that channel. So if you wanted it to have a certain contour for volume, you can adjust those attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release values for an envelope, enable it or disable it. And then there's also an LFO you can work with it, which on a kick drum, it's not like an LFO is always the most useful thing to deal with, but that's here. There's a filter on mod X and mod Y, and that's what mod X and Y will refer to later on. So low pass filter, or you can change that to a number of other types here, band pass, high pass, or different types of those. And the resonance on mod Y. So there's a lot of powerful tools to deal with your channels in here. And then there's a few more settings in the miscellaneous functions tab. You have just your level adjustments, and you'll see that this pan and this volume are independent of the actual channel pan and volume shown at the top here, which are in fact the same as the ones shown just to the left of the channel itself. So you can deal with these pans and see that they're connected to each other. Then you also have an enable or disable button, which will just cut whatever signal from that channel, or make any sort of adjustment, level adjustments, polyphony. You can make it monophonic, so only one note can play at a time, or have max polyphony, and have a few other different types of editing, echoes, arpeggiators, or have it cut itself, which all of this is very useful, but it might be a little bit out of the scope of just getting started. So we'll just jump back to the sample settings for this channel and jump back into the channel rack itself. You'll also notice that next to the channel, we have these numbers, and this is the target mixer track. So if we open up our mixer with this button up here, or F9, we can set where the audio from each of these channels will be going. So if I preview through holding control, you can again see down in the mixer where each of them are. And I'll hit F12 to close that for now and jump back over here. And we'll actually look at the step sequencer now of the channel rack, which you'll notice we just have 16 places we can fill with notes just by left-clicking and dragging, or right-clicking and dragging to delete. And you can do different fills. You can right-click on the channel to fill every 4 steps if you want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4 on the beat. And you can press up here to play the pattern, or hit the space bar to stop it. Same thing with up here. You have your transport. When you are selected on the pattern, you'll be playing whatever is in the step sequencer of all of the active channels. And generally speaking, you'll have these 16. You can change that if you go into your project general settings. You could have a different time signature if that's something you want to deal with, but the most common is 4/4 time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 16th notes for filling. And we can also go longer. If we just click and drag on the side here, we can go for a number of different bars, however long you want to make it. We'll stretch it out to 2 bars, so 8 counts. And you'll note right now that nothing is in this second bar, so hitting spacebar to play, it just loops around once it gets there. But if we wanted to fill different notes, we'd start to have a longer amount of time for this pattern. If we wanted more samples playing, we could have claps on beats 2 and 4 if we wanted to add that in there. So right now, and we could add different things. Maybe we want to fill every 2 steps of a hi-hat. We start to fill that in. We could have snares. And we have a little beat. And there's plenty more we can do to change this. We could add in different amounts of articulation with the graph editor. So if we select a channel, we'll see that the selected one has this little green light next to it. So say we want to work on the kick drum, we can go up here and click graph editor, and then you'll have a number of different parameters we can edit for each of these different notes. So the pitch, if we wanted to drop down the pitch of this one so that when this note plays, we have a different note. We could change the velocity. So if we wanted to work with that, maybe we'll do that on the hi-hat instead. We could have a little bit of variation on that velocity or per note sort of volume. The release velocity, fine pitch would be just a value we can change instead of the actual note on a keyboard. And also note that if you're holding Alt and then clicking and dragging, you set it back to the default value of whatever that may be for that particular parameter. Panning you can also deal with here. You can change between left and right ears. Mod X, remember, is just going to be the cutoff for whatever your filter was set in the channel settings. So you're essentially offsetting, and I'm going to tweak around a few things here so we can deal with this. And actually, I'll mute these other channels for the moment, so we're just dealing with the one. The kick, or we can also click solo by right-clicking here. And then we'll open up that graph editor and offset the Mod X here. And turn up the Mod Y. And now we have that high resonance low pass filter moving around with our settings for the graph editor. We could change the resonance with the Mod Y offsets from this graph editor as well. And Shift, we'll jump over to the hi-hat to look at this. We'll solo it and then select here. And let's fill every note. We'll just do that. We can tell right now everything is straight, but if you turn up the shift, it essentially nudges that note towards the other note. So it kind of makes a flam sort of thing with it. And a similar effect can be put in place by the swing of the note, and that's up here. You go to this knob and we can turn that up. And you start to see a swing added in. It basically takes the E and the of one E and and shift them toward the downbeat and the offbeat. So you get a swing feel. And another thing to note with that is in the channel settings for whatever channel, you can adjust how much of that swing from the main swing actually takes an effect. So if you have the main swing up pretty high, for this particular channel, you can turn it down so it's more or less straight. It's basically a multiplier for how much of that main swing is applied, which just gives you a per channel adjustment on there. I'm going to unsolo, so get everything back up. And you'll note that we can change the feel with all these different factors. Or just change all these different things to add in a lot of different feel to a pattern, which you can make very quickly. And even a step further than that, if we want to loop the pattern, we can click loop here, and you'll notice that by default, that just takes anything that does not go into the second bar and loops it. So you don't have to always go in and add snares on 2 and 4 or claps, anything like that. It just automatically continues doing what that first measure does. But there's also even more that you can do with this. You can do looping all channels or disable it for certain ones, and it shows up over here. We can enable or disable. And then there's also advanced looping, where you don't have to loop by a bar. You can loop by different measures of it. So say you just have the 1, you could go by a step. So you loop different divisions of what you have on the step sequencer into anything that's happening. And that can cause for some interesting rhythmic things to happen when you're programming your sequences. We'll turn this off for now and just work with the straight step sequencer, all manually done though. And I'll hit F12 again to close out everything except for the channel rack. And at this point, we'll take a little break and let this sink in and then come back to get into the browser and plugin picker in the next video. So I will see you then.